Alright, how is it going, people, and welcome back to another Discord bot tutorial video. So in the previous video I taught you lot how to make slash commands, and that is a type of interaction, as you lot know. So like I've basically got you introduced into interactions in a Discord bot, right? So hopefully you've had fun making slash commands like in the previous video. So in this video I'm going to teach you how to make another sort of interaction, and that is called buttons. So like as you can see, like in these examples, I've got some buttons here, and I can like press them and they can do specific like tasks, right? And like this is a very good feature that Discord introduced a good few years ago, actually, way before buttons were introduced. Like a lot of bots were using emojis as a way of, you know, pressing a button, like going to the next page of something, or like the previous page, or displaying something, right? So like we would use emojis as buttons back in the day, but now what Discord have done is actually made physical buttons that we can press, and like they can have any sort of functionality that we want, right? So like in this video I'm going to teach you how to make buttons and make them do something properly, right? So let's get started on that. So first of all, let's start by making a command, right? So let's say command, and then I'm going to name this button. So like that's our command, and let's make the method for it. So public async task, and then buttons. And then for normal commands we'll need the command context, ctx. Okay, cool. Let's make a message and send this to a channel, right? So let's say var message, let's say a new Discord message builder, and let's add an embed to it, why not? So let's say new Discord embed builder, let's say with color, so like let's give it like aquamarine, okay, and then we'll say with title as our test embed. Okay, so like that seems cool. There's nothing here that we haven't learned already. So like all we're doing is just making a message and just, you know, and like sending off. That's it. So we're doing await ctx channel send message async, and then our message. Okay, cool. So let's add this to our bot. So we'll make sure to do our commands, register commands, and then we'll add our interaction components class to it. Okay, so this is, you know, it's quite simple, right? So let's make sure this works first. So we'll let that build and run. There we go, cool. So let's just like execute button real quick, and it should just work. There we go. So test embed. Okay, so we've got our now we've got our embed message set up. So now I want to add a button to this message. So I'm going to show you how to do it. So what we're going to do is make a button before we send this message. So what we're going to do is say var button, and then what we're going to do is make a new Discord button component. But this is their documentation page. So if I go to API and then I search up the button component, so Discord button component, here we go. So as you can see, there are two constructors for this. So, you know, like this constructs a new button based on an existing button, but what we want to do is create a button from scratch. So this is what we want. So as you can see, these are the parameters that we need to pass in. So there is a button style, there is a custom ID, and then there is a label. So I'll show you what that means. So let's start by building the button. So first of all is the button style. So let's search up button style. So there's 4 button styles here. So there's the primary button, so that's just the blue button. There's the secondary button, that's just the grey color. There is the button style.success, that's the green button, and then the button style.danger button, that's the red button. So there's 4 different button styles that we can assign to a Discord button component. So let's just go with button style.primary. Let's get rid of this D# plus and make sure it's in the usings first. So that's much better. Okay. The next thing is the custom ID. So what this custom ID does is it represents your button in code. So we'll be using this custom ID later on to allow this button to do something. So when we get around to writing the logic to get this button to do something, we'll need this custom ID, because this custom ID is what represents our button in our code here, right? So I'm just going to name it button1. Now, in a realistic scenario, you want to make sure your button, like custom IDs, are basically custom IDs that are easy to remember or easy to manage, right? The label, I'm just going to name it button. So there we go. We've named our Discord button component, and there's also some optional things that we don't have to involve. So like there's board disabled, and then like I can also assign emojis to this button as well. But those are optional, so that they're not needed, right? So we've got our Discord button component. Now, how do I attach this onto a message? So this is where we'll get rid of this. So like let's get rid of this like semicolon, and what we can do is say add components. So we know that a button is a type of Discord component, right? So what we do is say add components, and then let's add on our button. Let's test this out. So let's start at the bot, and then let me execute button. And cool, there we go. So we've got a button right here. So like if I try and press it, then as you can see, it's just going to error. So it's going to say this interaction failed. And notice how it said interaction, right? So this is very similar to slash commands, because, you know, slash commands is also an interaction as well. If you think about the meaning of an interaction, it's basically something that you press, right? It's something that you touch, right? So it's quite interesting that a button is also an interaction. So that means we'll be using very similar code that we would with slash commands. Create a response async. So we'll be using a lot of that in buttons as well, right? Okay, so let's add on like another button. Why not? So like what I can do here is just copy and paste this button, and then name it button2, and then rename the custom ID to button2. So let's rename this to button1, and then rename this to button2. So now we can add this on. So let's add a comma, and then I can say button2. Now, please note that a Discord message can have 5 buttons in a row, right? So like a Discord message can't exceed more than 5 buttons in a row. A Discord message can have 5 buttons in a row, and it can have 5 rows of buttons. So that's 25 buttons in total that a Discord message can have, right? So please note that in mind. Like, let's execute button again, and we should get our updated set of buttons. So there we go. I've got my first button and my second button, and they don't do anything. So as you can see, so like it's just going to say this interaction failed, because now what we need to do is program our buttons to do something. And that's what we'll do in the next part of this video. Okay, so how do we get our buttons to do something? So if you guys remember, in episode 5, we learned how to use the event handlers of the bot. So this is where event handlers really come in, and they are very important. So let's go to our programs like .cs, and I'm going to make an event handler to handle these buttons. Because if you think about it, when we press a button, it is not only an interaction, but it's also an event, right? Like if you think about it, it is an event that is being triggered, right? So we need to program the button event handler to be able to detect what button we press, and then execute some code based on that. So what I'm going to teach you guys is how to do that, right? So what we do is say client, and then we need to get the component interaction created event right here. So this event fires when a component is invoked. So that basically means when a component is being pressed, or if someone is interacting with a component, right, this event's going to fire. So that's perfect, because this event is going to fire for our buttons. So what we can do is make our event handler for this. So let's say plus equals, and then we'll press tab to auto make the method for this event handler. So I'm just going to press enter and just leave it at that. So there we go. Here's our event handler code. So let me get rid of this, and let's get started. So now we're in the event handler for components, right? But there's multiple Discord components. There's buttons, there's drop down lists, right? So I want to make sure I detect only buttons, right? Since we've got our custom IDs here, what we want to do is allow our event handler to check for that custom ID. So like, as you can see, our button style and then string custom ID. So this is what allows our bot to detect a specific button based on its custom ID. So we want to check for button 1 as this custom ID for this button right here. So let's do that. So what we can do is do a simple if statement saying if the args, so our component interaction create event args, so let's say args dot interaction dot data and then the custom ID, the ID of the component that invoked this interaction, or the ID of the module of the interaction that was spawned from. Well, that's perfect because, you know, like this custom ID applies for buttons. So what we can do is say if this custom ID is equal to button 1, then we'll execute some code. So what we can do is say, I don't know, like this user has pressed button 1. Let's say that, right? So what we can do is say await, and then we'll say args.interaction, and then we can say create response async. Like hopefully you see now how buttons are also an interaction because it's using the same sort of code, right? So what we can do is say create response async. This user has pressed button 1. So we can say, so we'll say args.user.username has pressed button 1. Okay, so this seems very complex, but let's just execute this and see what happens. Alright, so let's start the bot and see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to execute my button command, like so, and then I'm going to press button 1. And there we go. As you can see, it's saying I have pressed button 1. That's very cool, right? And then like if we try and press button 2, it still doesn't work because we haven't coded it to do anything. So let's add that on. So what we can do is say else if, and then we can say the same thing. So what we're doing is checking for the custom ID of each button, right? So what we can do is say args.interaction.data.customID, and then this time it's going to be equal to button 2. So make sure the custom ID is the exact same as the custom ID on the button that you created. Otherwise it won't work, right? So you say button 2. So let's do the same thing here. So like this time they pressed button 2, right? So like if we start that up, so let's make the button again. So like if I press button 1, there we go, I press button 1. If I press button 2, there we go, I have pressed the button 2. Pretty cool, right? So like there's a better way I can do this, right? Say if you have, you know, multiple buttons, using if statements is quite inefficient, right? It's just long-winded. So why not use a switch statement? So let's put all of this in a switch block, right? So what I can do is say switch, and then what are we switching here? We are checking for the custom ID, right? So what we can do is say args.interaction data and then the custom ID. So in this switch block, we're just going to check for the custom ID of each button. So what we can do is say case and then our button 1, and then I can paste in that code, and then we can say break. So like break from that. There we go. And then I can say case and then my button 2, and then we'll paste in the exact same code, and then we'll make sure to break from it. So already that looks a lot neater, doesn't it? This is much more neater than doing if and then else if, and then like say if you have like hundreds of buttons, that's just it's just going to look like a mess, right? So a better way of doing this is to use a switch block. So let me change this to button 2. There we go. And then it should just work the same way, right? So let's do button again. And then I'll press button 1. There we go. I press button 1 and then button 2. There we go. I'll press button 2. So that's pretty cool, right? Like that's just the basics of buttons. There's nothing much more to it. Like all you got to do is make your Discord button component, give it a button style, make sure it has a good custom ID. That's the main bit. If you keep your custom IDs simple and neat, then when it gets to managing it in the event handler, it'll be effortless, right? Like, you won't have any sort of struggles or like any complications when making buttons. Like, I'll do this example once again because I showed this to you in the slash commands episode. Because watch, if I try and do wait and then args.channel.send message async, and then I do hello world. So if I try and do send message async and not send a response first, watch what happens. If I do button again, and then if I press button 1, watch what happens. It's going to say hello world, but it's still trying to look for a response to send. And it's still going to error. It's going to say this interaction failed. So it works in a very similar way to slash commands. So that's why you need to do interaction.createResponse async or do defer async and then send your response later on. Now that you know how to make buttons, I'll show you like a little example of buttons being used in a real life situation. So what we're going to do is finally make that help command that you lot have been waiting for. Because remember, in our program.cs, we set the default help to false, as you can see there, because we'll make our own help command later on. And that time has come now. So let's make a help command that involves buttons. And you'll see how cool it is, right? So let's say command, and then we'll say help. So let's say help. So this is our main help command for this, test bot, right? So let's say public async task, and then we'll say help command, and then we'll make sure to put in our command context, and then ctx. All right, cool. So let's make our message first. So let's say var message equals a new Discord message builder. So note that you can only add components to a Discord message builder. If you try and do it to an embed builder, that's not going to work because it doesn't have the method to add components, right? So let's do with title. Let's say help section, and then in the description, let's say please press a button to view its commands. So we'll have like different sections for each command. For example, fun commands, gaming commands, tool commands, etc, etc. So that's how it should work in your Discord bots, right? So okay, that's cool. And then let's send it off. So await ctx.channel, send message async, and then our message. So let's make a few buttons. So I guess let's make a few buttons for our basic .cs command, so our test command, our embed command, and then we'll make a button for our calculator commands that we made in the previous video, right? So let's do that. So what I'll do then is make 2 buttons. So let's say var basics button, and that's going to be equal to a new Discord button component. So once again, let's set it a button style. So let's do primary, and then like our custom ID, what's this going to be? So let's say basics button. So this is going to be our custom ID for this button that we will use in our event handler so that we know which button was pressed, right? And then our label is going to be basics. So that's cool. Okay, now let's make our calculator button. So let's say var calculator button. And then let's say another new Discord button component. This time, let's do the button style as something else. So let's do success this time. I don't know. Now let's make it different. So custom ID, let's do calculator button. And then our label will be just calculator. Okay, cool. And then let's add this onto our message. So let's say add components. And then let's add our basics button and our calculator button next to each other. And then we'll end it off right there. Okay, so we've got our button set up. Let's first of all check to see if it works, right? So let's test that. So our command is called help, isn't it? Yeah, so let's do help. And there we go. Here's our help section. Please press a button to view its commands. So as you can see, our basics is blue and our calculator is green. Pretty cool. So that all works. Okay. Now let's program our event handler to like display a list of commands, right? So for example, in my basics class, I've got a command called test I've got a command called embed. So like let's list a few of those examples like in our this help section that we've got here, right? So in our program.cs, let's make another case. So we've already got our switch block here. So let's make another case, and this time what we're going to do is check for our basics button first. So this is the custom ID for our basic button. Okay. So I want to send an embed of the command list, right? So let's make that embed. So let's say var basic command embed. So let's say new, so new Discord embed builder. So let's say the color is let's say black once again, and then in our title I can say basic commands, and then in the description I can basically like have a list, right? So let's list a few of these commands. So first of all, we've got test. So let's do test, and what this does is send a basic message, right? And then I can do \n, and that will make a new line. So I can add like another line under here, and let's do our next command. So what's next? Embed, right? Okay, so embed. So what this command does is send a basic embed message. So sends a basic embed message. Let's do like two more. So what's next? So we've got our calculator command. Okay, so let's do calculator. Whoops, there we go. Okay, so calculator. So this is going to do a calculator operation on two numbers. So performs an operation on two numbers. And let's do one more. And our last one is our card game command. Okay, so let's do card game. So let's say play a simple card game, highest number wins the game. So cool. Okay, so we've got our basic sort of list of commands set up there. So now I want to send this off. So what we can do here is pretty cool. So I can actually defer the button interaction here, args.interaction, and then defer async. So I can actually defer a button interaction over here, and that's pretty cool. Args.interaction, and then we can say edit response async. New Discord webhook builder, and then we can add the embed as our basic commands embed. So that should work. So let's give this a try and see what comes up. Okay, so we've got that. Let's press, so let's do help again. And then if we type in basics, let's see what happens. So there we go. It's basically sent a nice list of our commands that we've got here. So that's pretty cool. So another way I can do this is by using interaction.createResponse async, but I can change the interaction response type. So let's see how that works. So let me get rid of this. So let's not defer the response here. What I can do is say create response async, and then the interaction response type I can say update message. So let's see what that does. Update message. So let's say new Discord interaction response builder, and then let's add the embed as our basic command embed. So let's do help again. So I'm going to press basics, and let's see what happens. So there we go. So what this is doing is it's replaced the existing message with the buttons with the new message. I could add a back button here, and that could take me back to the message with those buttons. That's what update message does. It pretty much gets the existing message that the button is on, but it changes it to the new one. So that's pretty cool. So let's complete this command by coding the calculator button now. Let's add in our calculator button. So we can say case, and then our calculator button. Cool. And then let's do the same thing. So what we can do is just copy and paste this code, I guess. And then just, and then I just change it up a bit. So what I can do is change this to our calculator commands embed. So let's change it here as well. In our calculator slash commands, we have like 3 commands. So like we'll add, subtract, and multiply. Okay, so like that seems pretty simple, right? So what we're gonna do is say slash calculator and then add, because this is a grouped slash command. Remember? Okay, and then yeah, let's just let's see if that works. So what we'll do then is say help. So our basic still works. There we go. If we do help again, do our calculator commands, and there we go. So like there's our slash commands. So that's that. Honestly, like that is buttons. There's nothing much more to explain here. So if you have any questions, then make sure to leave a comment or join my Discord server where we can help you to our fullest. All the code that was shown here will be in the repo, and like that'll be it. And that'll be in the description as well. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Make sure you guys like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you lot in the next video. Peace out.